Hi guys and welcome to my latest video. Now what we are going to talk about today is how to make your Raspberry Pi, if you're using it as a music streamer, into an audiophile grade streamer. And we're going to do that by using Allo DigiOne SPDIF interface. And if all of this sounds totally unknown to you and weird, you probably missed my comprehensive guide how to actually use Raspberry Pi as a music streamer. And I'll leave that link down below this video, and if you haven't watched it already, if you don't know how to do that, please go and take a look at that video first. There I cover what you should do, how to install operating system, how to actually make it stream music, because you can do that only with Raspberry Pi. You can have small case, you can use its own USB outputs to connect them directly to your DAC, to its USB input, and that will work. And that will work just fine, actually probably a little bit better than general purpose PC. I'll not repeat that anymore, please take a look at that guide from a few months ago on this channel. But today now we are going to talk about Allo DigiOne that is a hat. It's a hat, that means it's an add-on. You can see these pins here on Raspberry Pi and the same thing here on Allo DigiOne board. So we just stack them together and then we turn our plain, regular, bare bone Raspberry into something that's much closer. Well, probably not even much closer. It actually is an audiophile grade digital source. So in this video, I'll just quickly go through some things that Allo DigiOne actually is and how it's doing that. I'll be quick about it because this is not a paid review by Allo. I purchased these things myself. So I'm going to focus mostly on when I actually put it in use and I use these outputs instead of USB directly from Raspberry Pi. What do I hear? What do I get for my money? And talking about money, actually, Allo DigiOne board costs 99 bucks. And that's, yeah, like twice the price of Raspberry itself. So what do you get when you buy this? First of all, this is only a SPDIF digital interface. That means that you here have two physical connections that you can use. One is pretty well known coaxial RCA output. Most of our DACs, most of DACs out there on the market actually have coaxial RCA input. So in that case, you just connect it with this one. Some of the DACs use BNC connection. That is this one, slightly bigger one. And the signal itself is exactly the same. It's SPDIF digital signal, just connector is physically different. And some DACs use this BNC physical connector. For example, chord DACs come to mind first, like Too Cute or Cutest. Interesting thing to say here is that you can actually mix and match if for any reason you want to do that. For example, you can connect cable on the RCA port on one side and BNC connector on the other side, or vice versa. Why would you do that? I don't really know. Some people already own such cables, and that's perfectly fine because the signal itself is same, just the physical connection is different, and they basically gave you a choice of two different connections for one and the same type of the signal. Now, what actually makes it to supposedly sound better than Raspberry Pi's USB outputs just by themselves? Allo says that, among other things, there are a lot of isolators here. For example, when signal goes through these pins on Raspberry Pi. Okay, let me quickly connect them here. Okay, see, now they're connected. It's like one hole. So when Raspberry Pi sends the signal to DigiOne board, DigiOne board then uses a lot of filters. Some of those are galvanic isolation of the signal. Some of them are galvanic isolation of the power lines. So by doing that, they actually try to isolate any ground loops, noise, and things like that. I don't want to get into details. To be perfectly honest, I didn't prepare to do that in this video. And other than that, there are other types of filtering here on this board that will try to get rid of all the noise and all the jitter that your audio signal would otherwise have. And not just the audio signal, but power lines too. So what is the end game of all this talk? It is that when you actually use DigiOne board and you connect your DAC through it and not through USB ports direct in Raspberry Pi, you should achieve better sound fidelity and get better sound in your system. Does it really work? Okay, let's go to that part. But just before we continue, I wanted to say that if you like these type of videos, please click that button, help YouTube algorithms spread them further and help this channel grow. And if you really like them, then consider visiting the Patreon page and becoming a patron. I would appreciate that a lot, but if not, hey, thank you anyway. Okay, so let's continue to the sound part. I actually planned to make a sound demo with everything else in the system being the same. Just in one instance, I feed my DAC through USB port from Pi. In other instance, I feed it from DigiOne board. And I will do that. Probably in a few days next week, I will upload that sound demo if I manage to capture the sound difference with my recorder, because that's not easy. You know, there's so much layers of compression. But I'll try to do that to give you the chance to hear that for yourself. But until that, I'll try to explain the differences to the best of my abilities. And when I actually bought this Allo DigiOne for the first time, I didn't know what to expect. For me, like for many other people, digital signal was something that was supposed to be very difficult to pollute and something that shouldn't have much influence on my hi-fi system. That's why I buy DACs and good amplifiers and good speakers. Digital is digital, at least I thought so. But when I bought this board for the first time, I set everything up, I connected it to my DAC, and I really did notice a sound that was different than before. And I'll try to explain how. First of all, I know this will probably sound like a cliche, but somehow background was a little bit darker. And what sounded through USB a little bit more like a wall of sound. Don't get me wrong, it was still great sound, but it sounded a little bit more like a wall. Now became a little bit more three-dimensional. I realized that a lot of things going on in the recording had a little bit more space around them. It's not by much, it's not by a huge margin, but it's definitely noticeable. So I played some songs that I know very well, and I realized that, for example, things that should be prominent, like a lead singer, they're still prominent, clean and great. But some other instruments that previously I felt were just behind the singer, just so close to the singer, behind her right shoulder, for example. Bass, double bass. On her other shoulders there was a guitar. And now with Allo DigiOne, that started to layer and peel off from her back a little bit better. And I realized, wow man, that double bass, it's not so close to her. It's not like they touching themselves. It's double bass is a little bit further behind. And it also sounds cleaner. I hear note vibrating with more clarity and more precision. And the same goes for guitar and for drums and for other instruments. And in a first moment, it's a little bit weird because my experience was that the sound overall, like the volume, was a little bit lower because some of the instruments took a step back, they were slightly cleaner, but I was used to that wall of sound presentation that was coming through USB output. So I naturally took my remote, I cranked the volume up a little bit, and I realized it's not tiring, first of all, because of all that space and more background darkness and more clarity and layering around instruments. I could actually increase the volume and not get tired and not get overwhelmed that easily. And when something actually really explosive happens in the recording, something, some really strong punch of the drum, something like that, that is of the same loudness as before. Things that should be prominent and that should be loud, they stay loud and prominent. And that leads me to the second part, which is Allo DigiOne actually provided me slightly increased dynamic. That thing that I thought that volume was slightly lower, for some instruments that are leading instruments, it's not actually. But for some more subtle details, it feels like it is. And you feel like the sound as a whole is slightly more relaxed and slightly more laid back. So you crank the volume up a little bit, you hear everything again really great, you hear even more space around everything, and I realized I hear more reverbs, I hear more echoes, tiny echoes around instruments, and that's the moment when I know this is actually not taking anything from the sound and from the signal. It's just taking something that wasn't supposed to be there before, something that was slightly hazing these instruments and their natural reverbs and echoes in the recording studios. And from that darker and more spacious soundstage, somewhat more relaxed, without any tiring effect, without any negative effect, you crank the volume a little bit more, everything still stays calm and clear and with pretty dark background, but things that are prominent somehow become more prominent and more jumpy and more energetic. And to be perfectly honest, that's my biggest impression. I cannot tell you, oh, you hear more subtle details, you hear things that you never before heard in the recording. When it comes to just those tiny high frequency details, to be perfectly honest, I don't hear them more. When it comes to just a string and details and fingers moving over string or things like that, I don't hear more of that. And I had a lot of friends visiting me, and usually their first impression is that same impression. DigiOne sounds dynamic. They don't say, oh, it sounds more subtle, it sounds more detailed. They say it sounds more dynamic. It somehow sounds lively and punchy and energetic. And if I switch back to USB for them, they say, oh yeah, this is like hazier, everything like melted a little bit, and just that sound stayed shrinked. And they all acknowledged that it's not by much. They say this is still very good sound, but once you hear that expansion of the space and that expansion of dynamics, it's so easily to get hooked to that, you know, because it's addictive and your brain and your ears know that that's how the real life works. In real life, we don't have equalizer that will equalize all the sounds at the roughly same level and put them at the roughly same plane. I know some people like that, it might be pleasant, it might be good for easy background listening, especially at lower volumes when you just want to hear everything without paying too much attention on space and on dynamics. But when I'm engaged into listening to the music, when I want it to be engaging and real life, energetic and spacious, I definitely feel that Allo DigiOne is a great upgrade that makes your convenient and very useful Raspberry Pi streamer into something that you can really call audiophile grade digital source. And I didn't have this experience firsthand, unfortunately. I was trying to arrange that, but it just didn't work. But I have an acquaintance that he has a pretty good ear. I trust him. He was using a Blue Sound Node streamer that is respectable streamer. A lot of reviewers and listeners and buyers are happy with its sound. And that device costs around $400-500. But after some time he tried Raspberry Pi with DigiOne board and with low noise power supply, and he called me and he said, hey, this sounds better than my Blue Sound Node. I asked him better in which way. He said Blue Sound Node sounds nice and calm and everything is there, nothing is sharp, nothing is edgy, but this one actually has more energetic edges, it has more dynamics, it's slightly more detailed and just punchier sounding. And he sold his Blue Sound and he actually bought into this whole Raspberry Pi upgraded to be audiophile grade streamer, and that's great. I bought into that too. Now for the last part of this video, I'll finish just by saying that when you make this contraption like this, of course you have to put it into some sort of casing, and for that you can use aluminum case, but the cheaper solution is a acrylic case like this one. I don't want to assemble it in front of the camera, it would be quite a long trip, but in the end it looks something like this. There are sides and everything. You put everything here and you have like a plastic casing. It's fully functional, everything works okay. You just insert the cables that you need, it works. You control it through your smartphone. But for all that details, please watch that Raspberry Pi as a streamer guide that I filmed a few months before. This was focused on Allo DigiOne. And what can I tell? If you have like a really entry-level system, I'm just throwing numbers here, but let's say that you have $100 DAC, maybe $200 amp and $200 speakers. I don't know if this would be something that I would recommend to you. Maybe I would say, if you want to upgrade something, buy better DAC, buy better speakers, play with that. But if you're already at some reasonably decent level, and I would say that if you already spent more than $500, $600, $700 on your whole hi-fi system, it would probably be able to show the difference between digital source directly from Raspberry Pi and digital source from a audiophile grade hat like Allo DigiOne. Now, this is not the only one on the market. There are others, like Hi-Fi Berry, that's another company. There are solutions to actually, if you really want to use USB, if you maybe have a USB only DAC, there are other types of solutions to actually make Raspberry into an audiophile grade streamer that still uses USB as an output. Allo produces something like that. It's called USB Bridge, but that's a little bit trickier to do. I think it's more expensive. That can be topic of some other video if I get my hands on that device. But for now, what I really wanted to say is that you have a decent hi-fi system and you use digital source as your main source. I think this is a really nice $99 upgrade. And for any reasonably transparent system and for any reasonably critical listener, it should make a really nice uplift in the sound quality. Now, as I said, I will try to record all of this. I will try to record the sound coming from the USB and then the sound coming from Allo DigiOne with my system that you see here around me, and I will try to put that video a few days later, because I know people are really suspicious when you're talking that doing something in a digital domain affect sound, because especially that's so difficult to prove in theory. It's so difficult to explain, but it's a real thing, it's happening, and a lot of people that basically just believe their own ears can hear it easily. And even best thing than believing other people and believing me if you can hear some sort of difference. And I'll try to do that video really soon. But until then, thank you for watching this. If you liked it, please feel free to leave the comment down below. Tell me if you want to hear more about upgrading Raspberry Pi. We can talk about linear power supplies. I don't know if you see this one here. I have a really good linear power supply currently. I'll try to make the video about that too, and then again sound demo about that too, because it's always good if you can hear something for yourself. But that would be all for today. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.